Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I hope you had a good weekend. Great to see you on the Zoom call, and then we're also dialing in on WhatsApp as usual. I'm just going to mute. If you're on the WhatsApp call, I'm just going to mute you. Don't take offense, but I'm just going to mute you if you come in. Today is a very interesting day to try and do in one lesson. And obviously, and it's editing, right? It's like, and I think anyone who has done any editing, and also, you can imagine that this isn't something that is easily sort of communicated in one day, right? People are professional editors, they spend years doing it. Other people, even if you're not, if that's not your entire job, you can spend a long time like learning how to be a good editor. So I'm not trying to pretend that I can teach you how to be a good editor in one day, but I think it's quite a steep learning curve, but you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much you can kind of pick up in quite a short space of time. And then it sort of takes a time to sort of combine your scripting and your editing and all of this to kind of come together to kind of create podcasts that that you're excited about producing. Okay, so that's not to say that that's not to negate what I just said and that it takes a long time, but I think what we're laying out here in today's task is this idea of like just downloading a program, and there's many different programs to choose from, and I hope some people can kind of talk about their experience of editing. That would be really exciting if we could kind of get into it a little bit. But the way I've kind of picked it out here is this idea of using Audacity, which is a very well-known program, and mainly because it's free. It's increasingly got better and better over the years, but it's free to download. It's on Mac and PC, and it's a little bit more fiddly than Pro Tools and Adobe Audition and some of the paid ones. But I mean, the fact that it's free makes it much more accessible. And to be frank, I've been using Pro Tools for years, and it's got to a point where it's actually becoming, because like a lot of these programs, right, you pay per month, and it's actually becoming increasingly expensive to use. And I'm starting to wonder if it's even worth using, because programs like Audacity are getting increasingly better, where a few years ago they were much worse. So, don't feel despondent if you're using Audacity, which is a free program. Don't feel that you're using a lesser program of some sort. Okay, so maybe I can just open it to the floor first, and just anyone who wants to give any sort of thoughts around audio editing, experience that they've had, if they found it difficult, easy, if they've got any advice, anything that anyone wants to share, please, let's start there. Hi.
Okay, so I want to share about my experience with editing.
Great. Please do share to the group.
Okay, it looks very easy when you maybe make a podcast and all that, then you want to get some things out, probably the noise and all that. But it's a bit technical, and you need to be very patient. And just as I said, you need the right software. And also, as I said, you discover that they have very expensive editing tools. I've used Audacity before. Did I accomplish what I wanted? I can't remember. But my experience is that it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah.
When you're producing, you should try as much as possible to make production as seamless and noiseless as possible, so you don't have to start editing back and forth. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I like what you say about having to have a lot of patience around. Can I just mute you because there's a lot of background sound. I'm sorry. It feels very kind of manipulative muting people. But I like what you say around this idea of you having to be patient. And it's true, right? You kind of go into a different sort of zone where you might not be used to if you're even writing, right? Like people talk about writing and staring at a blank screen. I think people that complain about that and talk about that in that way have never stared at a blank audio editing session, because that is a completely different level of like patience and having to like work at something to get anything out of it. And I think that's a great point, and it's something that people need to be prepared for, because I think it's something that like you might feel if you go into it expecting to get a lot out of it very quickly, that you might just give up about it. I think that's true. On your point of like expensive audio tools, I think I think people are sharing in the chat. I saw that Daniel has posted something around the version of Adobe Audition that he uses, which I'm going to read out now. But like I said at the top, Audacity, and I've put the link in the lesson today in the email and on WhatsApp, is entirely free. So I don't know if that answers your question, but sort of encourages you to not have to think about these audio editing tools as being expensive, but rather something that you can kind of use yourself, like something that you can have access to without having a significant amount of funds. I just want to read, I know Daniel's been having some struggles with his connection, so I'm just going to read out what he says. He says, I use Adobe 1.5. I find it fantastic and also complex for beginners. On the other hand, I found Audacity simple. So he's endorsing Audacity. However, he says, but it takes a bit of practice to get used to. He also says, I've been using Adobe Audition since 2016, and I'm slowly getting used to it. But I think we can all probably agree that a lot of these programs all have the basic sort of feeling that you've got these lines of audio, multiple tracks. And the more complicated your story becomes, the more ambitious you become as a podcaster. Therefore, the more complicated these tracks become. I remember showing one of these things to a friend of mine, and they were just a few years ago, but they were actually blown away about how many tracks there are and how many different colors there are. It can be quite intimidating when you look at it. But hopefully, when you first start, what we're really looking at is just one track of audio, and just like a sense of like, okay, you just want to be able to move this audio around to kind of give a sense of a story, because that's really what we've been talking about, right? Like last week, we were talking about editing. We were talking about two things, right? We were talking about the more complicated elements of editing around adding music or adding atmospheric sound, adding all this sort of stuff in order to create a scene. But we're also talking about just like what is essentially basic editing to give a sense of a story to what could maybe just be a simple conversation. And I think we need to balance those two things when we think about podcasting in general, and audio editing and audio production in general, because powerful things can happen in both those arenas. I don't want to be one of those people that throws out what can be very powerful in terms of a well-edited conversation for the sake of saying everything must be about voiceover and production and documentary style audio production. I think in your podcast, there is room for both these things, right? And it will depend on the type of story it is. It will depend on the amount of resources and time that you have. Depends on what you do, like how you, the balance that those things exist in. But, even in highly produced podcasts that I've done, there can be a high emotional, impactful moment in a sincere conversation with someone that you're interviewing. However, what's important to like kind of note when we're talking about it, which obviously a listener won't know, is that maybe I'm going to say 2.5, 3 minutes of conversation on tape is edited down from maybe 40 minutes of conversation, maybe more. And it's sort of like taking the best part, taking maybe a couple of moments like from that 40 minutes and combining them into that 2 minutes. So I think part of this sort of skill set of editing is what we're talking about in terms of the software, right? And we can get very focused in on like the technical learning of the software program. But I think also what needs to happen is also this idea of letting your creative spirit kind of unfold in terms of the possibility of editing. And you know, everyone on both these calls are right, you know, will have written something and will have edited writing and sort of have expertise in that. And obviously we don't think about editing a piece of writing as long as it retains like the truth and the initial intention. You know, you don't think about so much in terms of editing writing in terms of being you know, so manipulative. But I think it's something that we need to think about in terms of editing audio. And those two things are really important, like retaining intention and integrity of the initial audio, right? Everyone understands that you can edit audio probably easier than video to completely distort, just like you can with text, right? But people might believe it a bit more because they're actually hearing someone say it. You could distort someone's words in a way that makes them seem like they've said something completely else. And obviously you don't want that. However, you can edit something very intensely and really get the best of what you've captured into a very short space of time. And that's really like that kind of documentary audio production is really what we're after, right? We're not after like hours and hours and hours of conversation, but we do want to retain those conversation moments in an edited form. So I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that or wants to chime in on that. I know people are chiming in on the chat and sort of and adding their 2 cents. People are saying that they've used that Audacity. Oh, Daniel says, yeah, yes, I think we have to be trained first in order to be able to use Audacity. Okay, I tell you what I can do is I can post, because I think we're not going to have time to, we don't have time to necessarily go into, because it, you know, it will take in some ways quite a lot of time for, it takes a lot of time for someone to learn a software program, right? There is no easy way around that. There is no amount of kind of external training that can actually accelerate that process. But what I can do is post some online tutorials, which might help with a few of the nitty-gritties, like kind of things that will help you get through it. Penny has said, I looked at a number of tutorials from YouTube. That's excellent. Penny, maybe what you can do is, if you don't mind, if you can post ones that you found to be useful in the chat, that would be really great. I think we would really all appreciate that, because I was thinking about that earlier, and I don't know if I know of any that I can endorse. So it'd be great if someone has used them, if they can post them in. Does someone have something to say? Okay, so Daniel is saying that some links. Hi. Oh, your line is bad. Yeah? I can't, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Maybe you can just post in the chat. A very bad line. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear, Razia, I
Hello?
can hear you now. Yeah, yeah.
All right. I was saying initially I wanted to say I don't know how to edit, but you've promised there's going to be a training on editing. But you said something about consistency in the lectures in the morning. And what if for like my stories, I will go to different states, different locations. Will the sound still be consistent in that case? How do I maintain the consistency then?
Okay, so retaining consistency in a certain space when you've been going to different environments, basically. Is that what you're saying? Raza, is that what you mean? You're just on...
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 things to sort of say about that. The one thing is that you want, to a certain extent, you want different environments to sound different, right? You want them to be, you want them to give an impression that you're moving into different spaces. So it's not,
Exactly.
obviously there's situations where you interview someone in a studio and you might want to give that sort of feeling. But like if you're going out in the field to say to a church, for example, you might capture some sounds of people singing or something like that, right? And you might then give, like, the inside of a place like a church might have a different sort of feel than if you're out at the beach. And that is, saying that is also taking into account that you don't want to be at a beach and have incredible wind to the point where you can't hear what's going on, and that is total chaos. So it is sort of a contrived feeling that you're going into different environments. It's not complete. Like I did a series quite recently where I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I was going to this communal garden like many times, and I wanted this feeling that we were in the garden, right? But there were some moments where it was too windy and the external sort of environment made it impossible to record in the garden. So then for at those moments, I would take the people I was interviewing inside, and we would interview people inside, and then kind of mix that with some external sound that had been done on a less disruptive windy day. That's to say that you want to keep the sound quality high, but you want to actually make the feeling of different environments variable. And that's always the thing that people, I think, confuse. Like often I get sent audio that people, I can tell they think, oh, well, this is communicating that I'm beside a road, for example, right? And then that might be important for the story because it's about pollution, for example, right? I've heard audio stories where people will be talking about pollution and they think it's a good idea to go to the side of a road because that's where cars are spewing out pollution. However, as we all know, right, who've recorded anything, that sense of like being beside a road can make your audio, if you're recording voiceover, or anyone else's audio, completely unintelligible. And you won't get the story across. You won't be able to communicate that. So therefore, you have to think a little bit more creatively around like, how do you communicate this idea of pollution or traffic or something like that without putting yourself in a situation where the sound is inaudible. I can't stress enough how like bad sound really will make someone turn your podcast off. And it's not worth any kind of like environmental feeling that you might think it's giving if the sound is bad. So you need to, you want to balance those things. But however, like I said, like you don't want this feeling where people are just going from studio to studio to studio, really, because that will just give a feeling that you might as well have just stayed in one studio anyway, and you're not going to get a sense of movement. I hope that answers your question, because it is something that's quite difficult, and also volume, right? And people still go back into you said in the chat that you're a video person and you don't know more about the audio level setting, unlike video, but I used an iMovie and it works for me. Yeah, and I totally appreciate that. And I'm sure you've had that in video editing with the sense of trying to make the audio variable. Variable audio, you've tried to make it the same. And that still takes time, right? You can have filters, you can put loudness filters on it, but ultimately, like what makes a piece of audio really work, and a podcast particularly work, is if you go through the audio sort of clip by clip and make sure that the volume is the same, right, across it, unless you really want to give a sense that someone is shouting or something has happened or something is louder, and something like because of the story there might be an up in volume. But ultimately, like what you mostly want is you want people to not have to be fiddling with their volume control on their phone. You want people to feel that your voiceover and the person you've interviewed and those kinds of things and the music are all pretty much on the same level. And that actually just takes time with your audio program, upping and down, fiddling with the levels of each audio clip. And I wish it was kind of more easier to do. I mean, as I say, there are filters and there are all sorts of things to do, and they do kind of help to some extent. But like, I think the largest thing I can impress on everyone is to trust your own listening, right? So if you have to honestly listen back to your own audio, to your own voiceover, to your own clips or your own interviews and just be like, is this good quality? Not even content, but is this good quality audio? I think people get wrapped up in this idea because they've spent so much time, say, recording voiceover, right? In a studio, and they might have even paid for studio time. And you might realize that you didn't have a pop filter on your mic, and now it pops in that, and it's spelled out in the lesson, but this idea of like pops on the mic recording when you say B's and P's. And really, you can go through those with some digital removing software, but ultimately you might have to just record that voiceover again. And that's a hard lesson to learn. But that's a difficult, it's a very difficult, it's a difficult lesson to learn. So I'm gonna, yeah. Sorry, so someone was,
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure. So I think Penny has dropped in a step-by-step tutorial for Audacity on YouTube. Anyone else who finds any other kind of editing tutorials, please post them in. As I say, it's like learning software programs, especially remotely, isn't something that you can even like in person, isn't something that you can do other than just sort of working at it and working through a tutorial in some sense. Like yeah, and it's kind of a tough, almost like lonely process to kind of learn a new software package. But once you've kind of got a little bit further and made some inroads, please feel free to drop the audio that you've created like into the chat, and people can listen to it, and we can start to share the audio. I think that that's something that you can get lost in it, especially if you're audio editing on your own. You can get lost with this sense of like almost loneliness. And I think if you have other people that can listen to your edits, even if it's just a couple of minutes, and give you some feedback, but like, oh, that's good quality, or that's not, or that's a good edit, or it's not, I think that can really help the process move along. So please utilize the group, and I will obviously give as much feedback as I can as people go through that. Does anyone have any comments on this, or any thoughts or questions?
Hi, Paul. I have a question. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Gosh, you know, the podcasts are another level. I tell you, I have a huge respect for the podcasts that are out there, because there's so much work behind it. The guy I interviewed had so many ums and ohs, you know, during the interview. And once I uploaded it and I started listening to him, it became such an irritation for me, because he was umming every few seconds. So I went back and started editing out his ums, which thing is that okay? But it took hours. It took me almost a whole evening to just try and take the little bit and make him sound a bit more, you know, audio friendly. I know I do ums and I sound so pitchy and I cringe when I listen to myself, but can you edit someone to make them sound a little bit more professional?
Yeah,
is it ethical?
Absolutely. And the one tip that I would have in that is to do your major editing first, right? So before, it's almost like, if you think about it, like say you have an hour interview and you need to cut that down to 20 minutes, for example, right? I would recommend that you don't do the ums and ahs first over the whole hour. Like, you make the bigger decisions first. So, you know, you might have 20 minutes that you like in terms of the content, but as you say, the guy is like umming and ahhing all over the place. But then you would only have to fix the ums and ahs in the final amount of audio that you're going to use. And I think, you know, it does take time, and I think it is a balance, right? Because I think sometimes the big thing that people always teach you with editing at the very beginning is the sense of like, is not to cut out the breaths, because I think that's what some people think. I think they think that that's bad, but actually, if you do cut out all the breaths, you can actually feel quite like this person is not a human, like this person is a robot. And I don't think it's the same with ums, but I think, and I haven't listened to your audio, but I think there is something to kind of be careful about when you can over edit the ums out of something to try and like make something sound professional. And I always err on the side of like, I would rather have an in there than a blatant like rough edit. What I don't know what you would call it. Anyone can call it whatever they want, but like the idea of a rough edit, I feel is much more jarring than someone just going So when I'm editing in that kind of fine editing way, I like to kind of go back always. And I find that some editors just, or some people that work on podcasts just do not do this. And I think I would really stress that you try and do this is like, once you've done an edit, you just go back and like listen to make sure it's smooth, because that can be more that feels unprofessional from the production side rather than what someone is speaking. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Like the way people talk, when you're listening to audio, especially if you listen to it a couple of times, it's astounding how much they and are and sort of stutter and repeat themselves. I mean, the repetition I find is amazing, and it's not. And I think it's something that when you work or just live as a human talking, you just edit out how much people repeat themselves. And when you're on a tight time schedule and you want to make something sound professional, you want to get rid of that repetition, which I think is true. But yeah, I mean, I totally sympathize with you about how long it takes. I guess yeah, like I say, like I would just stress that you should do that fine editing only on the bit of audio that you're convinced will make it to the final edit. I saw. Yeah, sure. Go for it. Yeah.
I just want you spoke about music and audio. Do you have any channels that you can listen to music and download them without a license?
Yes, for sure. There's the Free Music Archive, and there's a couple of others. I'll post the URLs for those resources in the chat, and you can go on and download license free as much audio as you want.
Thanks.
Sure. I've just seen a couple of things at the chat. Which audio software did you use to record an edit? Paul posted free audio. Yeah. So Penny, can you say what editing software you used? I think someone's asking in the chat what audio software.
I started with GarageBand because I'm on Mac, and then I went on to Audacity. It seems like Audacity.
How did you find it? I've never used GarageBand. That's free with Mac.
I found it simpler. Yes, yeah. I felt it was, as with Apple, it's very simple. And when I first downloaded Audacity, I thought it was so complicated. And then I went to GarageBand, and then I went back to Audacity. And after going through a tutorial step by step, and they were very helpful. I mean, the guy showed us how to load 2 audios, which I hadn't realized, how to do that. And then I stayed with it because it's got quite a lot. It's got more features in the GarageBand. So I think Audacity might be the one that I'll stick to.
And is that the tutorial that you've posted in the chat here? Is that the one that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. Okay. Are there any other thoughts or someone else got something? Razia?
Yes, Paul, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. If there's a software where we could get translation, that is one question. And another thing is that, like I said, when moving around, it's always nice to test different free. There are softwares, and also there are those ones that you can get paid for. Because I recently discovered that there's this, it's called I will type it there. They've got an AI software technology where you can just put your podcast in there after recording, and then the and all those things Penny was talking about, it just, when you put it there, it just automatically removes all of it. And then you remain with what you need to edit.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know about that. That's great. And did you pay for that service?
Yeah, actually there's a free service where you can only record up to 30 minutes. And then there's that one you have to pay. and then the monthly payment. It's not a lot. I think it's about $25 per month, or you can subscribe for the whole year. So it's not very expensive. But then there is that other, you need also to know how to edit. So
Okay.
and then another thing is I was just editing is just too much work. I have learned. I did some editing and I'm still recovering. My hand is still recovering.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like it's a full-time job, hey? Once you get the hang of it, I'm sure it becomes a little bit more streamlined.
Yes, yes. And then there are these people when you interview them, they talk too much. You don't want to sound rude. You don't want
Yeah.
because I had a program where this person was talking and talking. I didn't know what to do. Because it is a lot of inconvenience. It was wasting the time that I had said. They were not listening. So I was in a bit of a predicament. How do I sort this?
Okay, there's a couple, I mean, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, but I can say there's a couple of ways I would recommend that. I mean, part of it is just a brute interview technique in terms of just, sorry, let me just, like a brute interview technique of just like stopping, like interrupting someone and telling them that they must change to speak about something else. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. And to be honest, some people are better at that than others. Like I'm not very good at that kind of way. I feel that sometimes it can completely derail the interview. Another maybe more passive way that I would recommend is just to note down the audio stamps on a piece of paper where you feel someone has completely gone off the rails, and then note down the audio stamp when they come back on the rails, you know, and that will really help you when you get down to editing. You're like, okay, so between minute 16 and minute 30, you know, however long they ramble for, you know that you don't even need to listen to that when you come to editing. And I think that can really help, right? You kind of, you know, the more information. So I spoke about in the lesson, like actually noting down detail, but another thing that can really help is noting down, like you say, like the audio minutes stamps when people either say something very interesting that you might want to pluck out, but also when people ramble off on a tangent or go, or maybe they get up and like go to the bathroom or something and then come back. You just want to know where that audio is so you can just cut it straight out. And I think I hope that helps, those two things. But I'd like to hear anyone else's thoughts on how they can speed up the editing process if an interview subject is, you know, goes off script so aggressively. Okay. So
Paul, I was just sorry, I was just going to give you, I let them ramble on and then I just cut them out. I just edit them out. Okay. Obviously that's
yeah. I mean, I'm the same, right? Just in that way of, I feel quite, depending on, I guess, if it's time or depending on who the person is, but often I feel just a little bit too, especially if it's someone who's like, maybe it's a slightly sensitive interview, you feel very rude, kind of just aggressively taking someone on. But yeah, I mean, I guess everyone has different styles, and sometimes, I mean, I often find with interviewing, like you can conduct yourself in a way that people expect, right? So, and as long as you're consistent and people kind of know what to expect from you, whoever you are or whatever you're doing or whatever you're asking of someone, then that's fine. But if you go off, if you're suddenly abruptly different to what people have become used to, then that's when people kind of get upset or they get offended in some way. Are there any other thoughts on that? Does anyone else have any other tips or hints or comments on solving that problem? Okay, so we're wrapping up the call, like and I know that this is I mean, especially compared to some of the other days, this is a lot to absorb in a very short space of time, and I don't want it to deter you. So please, okay, so Razia's put that, Veed, yes, I did know about them. Okay, so Razia's put that in the chat, that's perfect. And please use me as a resource and the other people in this course and on the chat for people to kind of exchange what is essentially like going to be a huge hurdle in terms of getting your podcast to market, essentially. And I completely understand that, but yeah, it kind of, you know, it has to be done in that way. And like Penny was saying, the more you do it, and the much quicker it gets, and the more you can kind of incorporate different kind of hints and tips along the way in terms of your own work and other people's work, then the quicker all this will become. But I know it can seem like a huge process at the moment. But thank you so much for all your input today. It's been really, really exciting. I'm really interested. I'm really glad that everyone is engaged with it. And I guess I really want to urge people to like keep at it, because the rewards ultimately when you get better at this and get faster at this, it's definitely worth putting in the time. But thanks very much, everyone. As before, I'll be posting the YouTube vid for this call in the chat. And let's keep the conversation going, especially around editing. And then I'll see you tomorrow for the next lesson. But thanks very much. Bye.
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 Bye.